Hi, Laverne.
Hello, Ira. How are you, darling?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
I'm lovely. I'm actually really excited about this. I usually try to prepare whenever I have to do something. So the great joy of preparing for this is I've been rewatching interviews with Leontine, rereading reviews, and listening to various recordings of her sing Il Trovatore. So I've had so much fun preparing for this.
Can you tell us about the very first time you heard Leontyne Price?
Absolutely. I was, I had to have been 10 years old, which would have been around 1982. And for whatever reason, my brother and I used to watch a lot of PBS in addition to a lot of television. And there used to be this show on PBS called Evening at the Pops, from the Boston Pops with John
Hmm.
Williams. And I knew who Leontine Price was because of a Black history book my mother had given to me when I was about 6 years old that I was obsessed with. And I was obsessed with her cheekbones and her full lips. And I thought she sort of looked like me and she was wearing a turban in the photo. And I just thought she was so beautiful. And so when they said her name on the Boston Pops, I knew who she was. And then, and then she was standing there and in like a dark dress. I remembered a dark dress, and she was in this sort of militaristic stance almost. And this sound came out of her that just I remember my mouth being open, and I'm 10 years old, and I just never heard anything like it. And I remember it felt like something. It felt like this round ball from the center of the earth, um, with all this vibration was coming towards me. That was the sensation I had, and it was just this shimmery vibe. I remember the vibration of the sound that felt so earthy and dark and just powerful. And I just remember it piercing through me. And I was utterly thrilled and excited and just transfixed. And yeah, it changed everything for me.
Did you feel? I mean, obviously, this had a huge impact. Uh, if you were to have to describe Leontyne's voice to someone who'd never heard her,
Mm.
uh, is that how you would this kind of brownness, this incredible?
As a child, it felt like a round sound that was from the earth, a vibration that pierces through you is the way I felt as a child. What's interesting for me now as an adult is I've heard the way that sort of other people describe voices and the way other people have described Leontine's voice. A lot of people say that her voice is sort of earthy and dark, that it's smoky. It's language I've heard used in relationship to her voice a lot. I love one of my favorites is with the way Jesse Norman describes her voice. And Jesse Norman didn't speak a lot about Leontine publicly. And when Leontine turned 90, I think it was in Opera News, there was a lot of different artists sort of talking about Leontine and her impact. And
Mm-hmm.
Miss Norman said that Leontine's voice was like a cloud filled with silver.
It's
Just like a
gorgeous.
cloud filled with silver. And that, for me, especially, because I think when you really think about Leontine's voice, you think about it in eras. And I think a cloud filled with silver feels like her voice in the 1950s and really in the 60s. And I think about that was probably when Jesse Norman heard her for the first time on the Metropolitan Opera broadcast. So I think that it definitely got darker as she got older and it got smokier. And in Leontine describing her own voice, says that she says the donkel sound. It's a dark sound, and she says it's a black sound. And she's very when she talks about her own sound, which she loves so very much, she says that it is an unapologetically black sound, and she's so proud that through all the training, through all the things that she sort of is gone through and the voice went through, that it was a recognizably black voice is something she was very excited about with her sound.
Do you think that uh, kind of rudimentary Earth-like presence of her black sound influenced subsequent singers? Did it give them a sort of an identity that they could relate to?
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting hearing Black singers talk about how and how many Black singers who came to opera because of Leontyne's sound. And for a lot of Black singers, they talk about how her voice reminded them of someone they may have heard it in church, like a gospel singer, right? So that there was, I think of a Mahalia Jackson, and really think of a Marion Williams, the gospel singer Marion Williams,
Oh yeah.
and that upper register that she has that vibrates in a very similar way that Leontyne's voice vibrates in the upper register. And so it's something that's familiar, the Blackness of it and the gospel that's in there is familiar to Black folks who've gone to church. And so I also think that gave her the crossover, right? Because every opera artist doesn't sort of cross over, but Leontyne had not a crossover sound in a way that diminished the grandeur and the amazingness of what she did, but it was a truly grand opera sound that the general public, when they heard her, it spoke to them, and it penetrated in a way that, and I think a lot of that did have to do with the darkness of the voice, that the gospel that was still there, and it just the warmth of the sound.
And what about, in addition to, of course, that incredible sound, her artistry, her dramatic presence? How did they affect you? What kind of impact do you think they had on you?
I think my brother, who had the pleasure of hearing recital of hers in San Francisco in the early 90s, when he talked about it, and I felt this many times listening to recordings and watching videos, he felt like he was in a suspense film, that he was on the edge of his seat the whole time, not in a bad way, that it was that she was able to create a level of excitement in her voice, that it was just so utterly thrilling. And you really feel that, I think, in the early 60s when she's singing in the recordings of Via Trovatore specifically, that there's a level of excitement and thrill that is just so, and it's not even like she's doing this crazy coloratura that you would think would be this thrilling, thing, at least, not, it's a little bit of coloratura in Trovatore, but it's just there's the way that she shapes the phrase. For me, the artistry is about the way that she's able to shape phrases, the legato line and the vibration on that line that is very rare, and it's really her, the vibration on the line, particularly the Verdian line, and the excitement that she's able to create when she, just from the voice, that the way she approaches a note, the way she approaches the phrase, and the high notes are always included in a phrase. It is thrilling. It's just thrilling.
Now, you have an encyclopedic knowledge, I know, of Leontyne's recorded legacy. Are
A
there
little bit.
just a little bit? Are there particular arias or recordings of her that you particularly love her in?
There's so many. There's a lot, Ira, and again, it's ears by era. And my favorite era. It's funny because my brother and I talk about this a lot. My favorite, I came to Leontyne when in the 80s, right? So when her sound was she was in her 50s by the early 80s, and her sound was very dark. It was quite a bit darker. It didn't always vibrate the same way it did when she was younger. My favorite era, though, is early 60s. For sure. And so I love, and as I studied different trovatores that she's done, and particularly D'Amore, Zuale, that aria, I was thinking about like where it's sort of, for me, it peaked in an interesting time at the Bell Telephone Hour recording of D'Amore Suale. I think it's like so much of what is fantastic about her Trovatore is really encapsulated there, even more so than the debut at the Met, because it was a year or two later, and everything just felt even more settled and more worked out. And I think at the Met, I think when you listen to the pirate recordings of her debut, there was so much energy, and the tempos were quite fast that night of her debut. And there was just such a level of excitement. You felt, I don't think there were nerves, but I think there was just such excitement. And the Bell Telephone Hour, everything felt more settled. So I'm obsessed with both the Taci la Notte and the D'Amore and the Bell Telephone Hour. And then I love her Carnegie Hall debut. It's a disc called Leontyne Rediscovered from 1965,
Yes.
her recital debut at Carnegie Hall. And the Care Selve, for me specifically, because so much of what Leontyne is about for me is the line. It's the vibrating legato line. And the way she sings Care Selve is one of the most glorious things that I think exist in the world. Um,
Do you think that because you also sing Cade Selve, do you think that she's had an influence on your singing and your choice of repertoire?
Of course, of course. She's the reason. She's the only reason I study opera with you, Iris, because Leontyne Price is just I when I hear her sing, it makes me want to sing, and sort of some of the ornamentation and the liberty she takes in Cade Silve, I do those same things in my rendering of that music. Yeah, yeah.
Did you feel it when you first heard her sing and you related what that was like? Did it also make you want to sing back then? Did it kind of spark some germ for you?
Yes, it was not. I mean, I was a dancer growing up, so I was already studying dance by the time I heard her, and that was my focus. I knew I wanted to sing and act eventually. I didn't actually start studying singing till college, but yeah, I had no idea how I could even make a sound like that really until I moved to New York and discovered you.
Well, that's very flattering. Thank you. Um, when we talk about favorite divas and we talk about, uh, well, we use words like worship and obsession. It's more than just being a fan. Uh, what are your thoughts on that and your relationship to Leontine in terms of that?
Someone I forget the outlet. I think it was them. This virtual sort of um, website asked me about my sort of first moment of queerness, and I don't identify as queer, but I do think queer is a verb, and I think there's something about, and I talked about like hearing the 18 Price for the first time, and I think there's something very queer about that, in that queering as a verb. But I think about Wayne Kastenbaum's book, The Queen's Throat, from the early
Oh,
90s,
yes.
opera, homosexuality, mystery of desire is the subtitle, where he sort of makes this correlation between what we call queerness now and a love for opera. So I think there's something about diva worship in like, queerness and queer culture. But I think there's diva is sort of, it means goddess. It means, I think that there's something about music. Because I think I have the diva thing for Beyonce as well, right? So I love Beyonce and I love Leontyne Price. But there's something about music and divas that they are goddesses, and they are, if you do it right and you're really a diva, you're meant to be worshipped. You really are. And I think with someone like Madame Price, that she was just so grand, and she was just so arrogant. She even says arrogant about her talent, self-possessed, a barrier breaker. There's just so many things about her that you just have to stand, as the kids say. I have to stand. You just have to like sort of get wrapped up in all of it, and I think it's the way a real diva walks out on stage. It's the way she takes a bow. It's the way she greets an audience, and these are all things that Leontine has down in beautiful ways. Leontine taking a bow, there's just, it's really really fantastic. She immediately, and people are critical of this, but she immediately, sort of when the note ends and she shakes the conductor's hand and immediately leaves the stage and comes back for her curtain calls, and it's business-like, but then it's also just, it's grand, and it's just, it's one of those things that you can just get caught up in, as well as the voice. So I
Yeah,
think
you said self-possessed, and I think that's someone who knows her own worth. And
yeah,
immediately, I've done this great job, and now I'm off the stage, and now I'm back, and I do this great job some more. And I've always had
yeah.
that feeling about her as well, that she really knows who she's about, and she understands the beauty of her voice. It's really through Leontine that you came to be an opera fan in general. What is it you love about opera as an art form?
Before I answer that, I want to just mention the knowing your worth thing. I reread the Time magazine article from
Ah, yeah.
March 10th, 1961, that I obviously own. And her parents, who Leontine was, her parents were trying for 14 years before they conceived her. And there was clearly such a sense of love and being wanted, deeply wanted by her parents, and deeply loved. And I think that was the beginning of her understanding her worth. And then I think too when she got to Juilliard and understood and really understanding what she was carrying around in her throat. I mean, if I sounded like that, I would probably feel really wonderful about myself as well. So I think I think it's the parents. I think it's the way in which her talent and ambition was so beautifully nurtured. I started crying rereading the article when at 5 years old, her parents she had been playing the piano since 3 and a half, and at 5 years old, her parents used the family's Victrola as a down payment on a piano for Leontyne.
Yes.
So at 5 years
Yes.
old, she was able to study piano. And so this all the sacrifice that happened, and it just reminded me of all the sacrifices my mother made for me to be a young artist. So that I think comes from her parents. And I think in terms of why I love opera, I think it's all of that. It's all, I mean, it starts with beautiful voices. I think the operatic voice is the closest thing to God and the closest thing to something that is really divine and transcendent. And I've always been interested in transcendence. And I think opera and high art in general is about sort of transcendence. And I think Leontyne Price sort of epitomizes that. Obviously, there are not singers like Leontyne Price around anymore. But I love the theater. I love the drama of it all. When it's done well, it is very thrilling and it's really exciting and it's fun. Can I actually say one other thing because I
Yeah.
is what I haven't really talked about is how important Miss Price is and was to being a barrier breaker and in terms of race in opera and in the country. And what I think is so beautiful now is that the recorded legacy, particularly, is that the race is really unimportant. It's just that she was exceptional. It's just the voice. It's not about her having been Black. But I always think about 1955 and when she sang Tosca on television, and she became the first Black singer to sing televised opera and first Black artist to have a prominent role on television, period. And how this is another reason she's such an inspiration for me. She was 27 years old. Once the announcement was made, people started freaking out. Of course, the South would not air it. There were protests. She calls it noise. She talks about all the noise and all the fluttering when she talks about it. And in an interview in 2002, she's asked, "Were you intimidated?" And she says, "No." And she says, "This is an opportunity that was there that my country gave to me." And I'm just like, I can't imagine being 27 years old and it's 1955. This is the year of the Montgomery bus boycott. It's also the year that Marian Anderson made her debut at the Metropolitan Opera. So many things were going on racially, though, in the country. And she says, I was only concerned about my voice and make my flexibility. Had I rehearsed enough? And could I make the impact that I wanted to make as an artist? And that has been such a beacon for me throughout so much of my life. She is a role model for me as a barrier breaker, as well as a great artist, because I just can't imagine. I can't imagine what that would be like. And she did it and she was successful and just, there just aren't really words for that. And when I think about when I saw her for the first time and the impact that she had on me, I think about the impact that Marian Anderson had on her when she saw her for the first time.
Mm.
And Grace Bunbury, I was listening to interviews with Grace. Grace's birthday was last week. I was listening to interviews with Grace Bunbury and Shirley Verrett, and they had very similar experiences listening to Marian Anderson in recital when they were children that like changed their lives. And so I think it's very important to note that Leontyne Price broke so many barriers for Black singers. There's still challenges for Black artists in opera, of course, but for that generation, the Grace Bunburys, the Martina Arroyos, the Shirley Verretts, the Riri Grist, et cetera, there were a number of Black singers who had lovely careers, who were contemporaries of Miss Price's and the generation after that. And she, I would say, is largely responsible for that. And I think that's an important thing to note, as well as the incredible artistry.
Yes, indeed. I think the barrier breaking was tremendous. I think we both went and saw that Tosca when they showed it at MoMA. Uh,
I had to fly out. And I couldn't.
oh,
And
I remember that. That's
I was
right.
going to try to change my flight. And
You
then it
tried to change the
worked with
flight. That's right.
It just
It
didn't work with
was
the schedule.
incredible because everything you say about, her self-possessed quality and her incredible confidence in that performance, it's stunning. And then knowing what the background of what was going on in the country at that time and that she transcended it, is amazing.
And what Leontyne always says about it, and Grace Bumbry said it in a different way in an interview I heard from her because they was asking Miss Bumbry about Bayreuth and her debut there and
Oh,
all those
yes.
controversy around her being a Black woman in that position. And she said, I was very religious and I just prayed and I just turned it over. And I feel
Mm.
like that the piece of turning it over to someone, an energy and power that's greater than you. Leontyne actually, before her Met debut, she says that in her prayer to God, she said, Jesus, you got me into this. Now get me out of it.
That's fantastic.
Isn't that wonderful? And
That's just
I'm
fantastic. Yeah.
rereading one other thing I'll say, rereading the Time Magazine article that, I was thinking about the 42-minute standing ovation that she got after her debut, which is the longest in Metropolitan Opera history, that there were so many people from Lower Mississippi in the audience. So I'm thinking like, okay, maybe the deck was stacked in her favor in terms of there were so many people from Lower Mississippi, the Chisholms. I've forgotten how much the Chisholm family like was so instrumental in her development and just supporting her life and her work. But when she arrived at the Met in 1961, she had already appeared on television multiple times singing opera. She had a recording career, so she was not unknown to American audiences. She had obviously had the relationship with Maestro Herbert von Karajan and all the European sort of success. So she came to her debut. She was a star already, really.
Hmm.
Um, so I like to think about that as well. Anyway, one other thing I was thinking about, like last thing I'll say, that 1961 season, Joan Sutherland actually made her debut as well, and of course Franco Corelli made his debut along with Miss Price. And so 1961 was a really interesting year for debuts at the Met, and a lot of iconic singers made their.
Yes, it was amazing. I was at the Sutherland one, but that was my first opera, and it made a bit of an impression too. I missed the Leontine Franco one by a few months. I started
Mm,
going the following November. I
yes.
I think we have everything we need. I think as
I give
usual.
long answers, and I like to say there's a lot I would have to say. But anyway, good luck editing this.
Yeah. Good luck.